The aroma, earthy and warm, hit Julian Moreau first. He took a bite of the unassuming bread. In that instant, the world-renowned chef, known for his unshakable composure, felt his meticulously crafted defenses shatter. A single tear traced a path down his cheek as the bread slipped from his numb fingers. The pristine kitchen of Loaf, usually a symphony of controlled chaos, was now silent, save for the soft clang of the dropped bread on the gleaming stainless steel. Julian, his stormy gray eyes wide with an emotion he hadn't felt in decades, stared at the young woman who stood quietly by the pass. Who made this?" he demanded, his voice a raw whisper, utterly unlike his usual authoritative tone. Chef Antoine, flustered, gestured towards the new kitchen porter. "Elara Vance, chef. Just a simple loaf she baked this morning." Julian approached Elara, his gaze piercing, his composure fractured into 1,000 pieces. In the austere elegance of Julian's private office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the bustling kitchen, the air was thick with unspoken questions. "That bread," Julian began, his voice regaining some of its steel. "It's extraordinary, a taste I've never encountered. Where did you get the recipe?" Elara, her simple uniform, a stark contrast to the opulent room, met his gaze calmly. "It's my grandmother's recipe, Chef Moreau. A family secret." Julian leaned forward, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "Name your price. I'll buy it. For Loaf, for anything you wish." Elara shook her head, a quiet but firm refusal. "I'm sorry, sir. It's not for sale. It means too much to us." Julian felt a strange resonance in her words, a familiar echo of his own guarded heart. Later that evening, in the cold grandeur of his penthouse apartment, Julian stood before his state-of-the-art kitchen, the city lights twinkling like scattered diamonds below. He tried to recreate the bread, kneading dough with practiced hands, but the magic was gone. The smell of the flour, the warmth of the yeast, it all brought a torrent of memories. He was a boy again, small hands sticky with dough, beside his older sister, Sylvie, in their grandmother's humble kitchen in war-torn France. The star bread, as they called it, a comfort against the fear. He remembered the smell of wood smoke, the crackle of the fire, the forced smiles of his parents as evacuation orders loomed. Then, the chaos, the separation, his desperate cry of, "Sylvie!" as she was pulled away, clutching a small, crude drawing of their grandmother's bread. The wound, 70 years old, ripped open anew. Miles away, in her small, cluttered apartment, Elara Vance gently placed a fresh, warm loaf of star bread on the worn kitchen table. Her grandmother, Clara, frail and often lost in the fog of Alzheimer's, sat by the window, her gaze distant. "He was very strange, Grandma," Elara mused aloud, recalling Julian's unexpected tears. "He really loved the bread." Clara, usually unresponsive, slowly reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing the crust. A faint smile touched her lips. "Sylvie's star bread," she murmured, her voice thin but clear for a fleeting moment. "To guide her home." Elara's brow furrowed in confusion. Who was Sylvie? The name was unfamiliar, but the bread, this humble loaf, felt inexplicably precious, a link to a past she barely understood. The next morning, Julian sat in his office, his resolve hardening. He recounted the incident to Marcus Thorne, his business partner, a man whose impeccably tailored suits were as sharp as his business acumen. "It was just a piece of bread, Julian," Marcus stated dismissively, his eyes on his tablet. "A sentimental distraction. You're the chef, not a bakery owner. Focus on the upcoming review, not some kitchen porter's hobby." Julian clenched his jaw. "You don't understand, Marcus. It wasn't just bread, it was a memory." Marcus scoffed. "Memories don't earn Michelin stars. Don't let this woman jeopardize everything we've built." But Julian's conviction was absolute. This wasn't about the restaurant anymore. This was about a ghost from his past, and a glimmer of hope that had suddenly appeared, warm and fragrant, in his sterile world. Later that day, a discreet nod preceded the entrance of Mr. Davies, a private investigator whose bland appearance was his greatest asset. Julian handed him a faded, sepia-toned photograph of a young girl with bright, curious eyes. her hair tied back with a simple ribbon. "Her name was Sylvie," Julian explained, his voice low. "My sister. This girl, Elara Vance, the kitchen porter, her grandmother bakes a bread that tastes exactly like my grandmother's recipe. I need you to find out everything about Elara Vance and her grandmother Clara, their family history, birth records, anything that could link them to a family, perhaps from France, evacuated during the war." He emphasized, "Discretion, Mr. Davies. No scenes, just answers." Davies nodded, scribbling notes in a small leather-bound book. The ghost of a lost child, now a case to be solved. The world was a canvas of muted sepia and ash. It was 1944, and the French countryside, usually vibrant with life, was choked with the acrid scent of smoke and fear. Young Julian, barely 6, clutched his grandmother's skirt, his small hand lost in the coarse fabric. Beside him, his older sister Sylvie, 7, her eyes wide with a precocious understanding, held their grandmother's other hand. They were just 2 of the thousands of children being evacuated, their village a casualty of war. Their grandmother, a woman whose hands knew the ancient magic of dough and hearth, had insisted on one last comfort. In the pre-dawn chill, before the trucks arrived, she had pulled a small rustic loaf from their makeshift oven. It was shaped like a star, dusted with flour, the crust still warm. "This is our star bread, my little ones," she had whispered, pressing a piece into Sylvie's hand. "It will guide you home. Remember its warmth, Sylvie. Remember the recipe." She had murmured the ingredients, a rhythmic lullaby, as Sylvie, with the seriousness of an elder, tried to commit them to memory. Then came the shouts, the chaos. Children were pulled into different trucks, a sea of desperate faces. Julian watched, his heart tearing, as Sylvie's hand was wrenched from his grandmother's. "Sylvie!" he screamed, his voice lost in the din. He held tight to a crude drawing he'd made of the star bread, his last tangible link to her, to home, to a life that had just shattered. 70 years had passed, but the smoke still clung to Julian Moreau's soul. He stood in his opulent penthouse, the city lights a glittering tapestry beneath him, yet he felt a profound, aching emptiness. The loss of Sylvie, of his entire family in the war's relentless maw, had carved a chasm in his childhood. He had filled it with ambition, with the meticulous precision of haute cuisine, with the relentless pursuit of perfection that had earned him 3 Michelin stars. Every dish, every carefully crafted menu was a distraction, a barrier against the overwhelming tide of grief. He had built an empire of flavor and prestige, but it was a gilded cage, beautiful from the outside, cold and hollow within. Success had not brought solace. It had only amplified the silence where laughter and family should have been. The star bread, tasted just yesterday, was the first thing in decades that had breached his carefully constructed defenses. It wasn't just a flavor, it was a ghost, a whisper from a past he had tried to bury, now rising, demanding to be heard. The aroma of yeast and flour was Elara Vance's morning prayer. In her small, sun-drenched kitchen, a fresh loaf of the star bread cooled on a wire rack, its crust golden, its familiar scent filling the modest apartment. She sliced a piece, tenderly buttering it for her grandma Clara, who sat by the window, her gaze lost in the morning light. Clara's mind drifted, a faulty radio signal. But sometimes, the bread seemed to anchor her. "Good morning, Grandma," Elara murmured, placing the plate before her. Clara's frail fingers reached out, touching the star-shaped loaf. A fleeting moment of clarity washed over her eyes. "Sylvie's star bread," she whispered, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "To guide her home." Elara frowned, a familiar pang of confusion. They Sylvie again. Who was Sylvie? Her mother had never spoken of a Sylvie. But the bread, this cherished recipe, always brought a spark to Clara's eyes. Elara kissed her grandmother's forehead, then gathered her meager belongings for her shift at Le Fleur, unaware that her simple act of baking had set a billionaire chef on a desperate quest. A few days later, in the hushed elegance of Julian's office, Mr. Davies, the private investigator, delivered his initial findings. Davies was a man of quiet efficiency, his voice a low, steady drone of facts. Amelia Russo, as requested. Mr. Moreau, clean record. Works 2 jobs, kitchen porter at Loaf and a morning shift at a local cafe. Sole caregiver for her grandmother, Elara Vance. No immediate red flags. He paused, consulting his notes. The grandmother, Clara, has early-onset Alzheimer's. Significant medical debt. The bread recipe, according to Ms. Russo's colleagues, is indeed a family recipe, believed to be from Elara Vance. Julian listened, his expression impassive, but a flicker of disappointment crossed his eyes. No direct link to Sylvie, no immediate family connection. And the Vance family? Julian pressed, his voice taut. Any connection to the Moreau family of Alsace? Davis shook his head. No, sir. The Vance line appears local, working class, for generations. Nothing in their documented history suggests a link to your family. But I'm still digging into Elara Vance's past, her birth records specifically. Julian nodded slowly, a renewed determination hardening his jaw. The bread was too potent, too specific. There had to be more. Julian found himself observing Elara, not openly, of course, but from the periphery of his kitchen, a silent, almost spectral presence. He watched her move, a quiet efficiency in her every action, whether scrubbing pots or stacking dishes. She was unremarkable, as he had first thought, but now he saw beyond the uniform. He saw the subtle grace, the dignity she maintained amidst the grime and clamor. She wasn't just a porter, she was the keeper of a memory, a living link to a past he desperately sought. He noticed the faint signs of exhaustion around her eyes, the way she sometimes clutched her side, but also the quiet strength that seemed to emanate from her. Chef Antoine, bustling past, paused, a puzzled frown on his face. "Is something amiss, chef?" he inquired, noticing Julian's unusually fixed gaze on Elara. Julian merely grunted, a dismissive wave of his hand. He felt a strange protectiveness stir within him, an emotion he hadn't known since childhood, confusing and unsettling. "Julian, we need to talk." Marcus Thorne's voice, sharp and devoid of warmth, sliced through the quiet of Julian's office. Marcus stood, arms crossed, a picture of corporate impatience. "This obsession with the kitchen porter. It's unprofessional. It's a distraction. You're losing focus." Julian looked up from a faded map he'd been studying, his eyes still distant. "It's not an obsession, Marcus. It's a pursuit of truth." Marcus scoffed, a humorless sound. "Truth? You're a chef, Julian, not a private detective. Lafleur's reputation is at stake. We cannot have the owner of a 3-Michelin-star restaurant fixated on a staff member. There are legal implications, harassment claims, public perception." His words were a torrent of pragmatic warnings. Julian slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing in the polished room. "Her name is Elara, and I will not be swayed by your cynical assessments. This is personal, Marcus. It's about my family, a past I thought was lost forever." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Then it's time to choose, Julian. Your family or your empire." Julian met his gaze, unflinching. "I choose truth. And if that means fighting you, then so be it." The weight of the world pressed down on Elara. Back in her small apartment, the dim light seemed to magnify the stacks of bills on her counter. There was a new one, stark and official, from the social worker. A review of Clara's care, hinting at state-run facilities if Elara couldn't prove adequate financial provision. Her heart ached, a heavy, dull throb. She had refused Julian Moreau's offer of money, a sum that could have wiped away this crushing debt, all for a simple bread recipe. Was it pride? Foolishness? She looked at Clara, who was now awake, humming a tuneless melody, her eyes unfocused. "Oh, Grandma," Elara whispered, tears pricking her eyes. The choice felt impossible, a betrayal no matter what she did. Then, Clara's humming stopped, her eyes, suddenly clearer than they had been in days, fixed on Elara. "Sylvie," she murmured, her voice frail but distinct. "Leaving home, a star to guide her." Elara froze, her breath catching. "Leaving home." The words, often fragmented, now carried a new, chilling resonance. The bread wasn't just a recipe. It was a map, a memory, a story yet untold. And Elara, despite the crushing weight of her own struggles, felt an unshakable resolve to protect it, to understand its secret, for both herself and for Clara. The chill of the drizzly evening clung to Elara Vance as she exited the back service entrance of Loaf, her apron still faintly smelling of saffron and expensive butter. Her shift was finally over, her feet aching, her mind already on the bus ride home to Clara. But as she stepped onto the slick pavement, a sleek black sedan, its tinted windows impossibly dark, purred to a stop beside her. The rear window hummed down with a faint mechanical sigh, revealing Marcus Thorne, Julian Moreau's business partner, his face a mask of cold, unyielding calculation. Beside him sat a hulking associate. "Miss Vance," Marcus said, his voice smooth as polished obsidian, yet carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "A moment of your time, if you please. Mr. Thorne would like to discuss a proposition." It wasn't a request. Elara's heart gave a nervous flutter, a premonition of unease. Reluctantly, Elara slid into the plush leather interior. Marcus didn't waste time on pleasantries. He pushed a thick, unmarked envelope across the seat, its weight hinting at its contents. "Inside," he began, his eyes fixed on hers, "is a check for a sum that will solve all your immediate financial concerns, Miss Vance, along with a non-disclosure agreement. You give us the recipe for your grandmother's bread, you sign the papers, and you forget you ever worked for Loaf or met Julian Moreau." Elara's breath caught. The number on the check, a dizzying 5 figures, flashed before her eyes. It was enough to cover Clara's medical bills, to fix the leaky roof, to lift the crushing weight of debt. But then she thought of Clara, her frail hand touching the star bread, murmuring, "Sylvie's star bread, a guide." To sell it would be to sell a piece of her family, a betrayal of a history she barely understood, yet felt deep in her bones. The next morning, Elara stood in Marcus Thorne's impeccably sterile office, the thick envelope still sealed in her hand. The aroma of stale coffee and ambition hung heavy in the air. Marcus, seated behind a vast mahogany desk, looked up, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "Have you reconsidered, Miss Vance?" he asked, a condescending smile playing on his lips. "I told you, Mr. Thorne," Elara said, her voice soft but unwavering. "I cannot sell it. It's not for sale." She placed the envelope carefully on his desk. Marcus's smile vanished, replaced by a cold fury that tightened his jaw. "Don't be a fool," he snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "This isn't a game. You're making a terrible mistake. There are consequences for defying people like us, Miss Vance. Consequences for your employment, for your living situation. You will regret this." Later that day, in the bustling, clanging symphony of Loaf's kitchen, Chef Antoine approached Elara, his usual boisterous energy muted. His gaze avoided hers, fixed instead on the gleaming steel counters. "Elara," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I regret to inform you that your services are no longer required here. It comes from above, you understand. Nothing personal." He offered a small, sympathetic shrug, a silent apology for a situation beyond his control. Elara felt a familiar ache in her chest, the sting of injustice, but no surprise. She knew it was Marcus's doing, a swift, brutal execution of his threat. She untied her apron, its flour-dusted fabric feeling heavy, and folded it neatly. "I understand, Chef," she said quietly, her dignity intact even as her world began to crumble. When Julian Moreau heard of Elara Vance's dismissal, a cold, searing rage, unfamiliar and potent, roared through him. He stormed into Marcus Thorne's office, the polished oak door slamming against its frame. "You fired her!" Julian roared, his face flushed, his carefully constructed composure shattered. "How dare you use the resources of this restaurant, of Tremai Restaurant, to bully a young woman for a personal vendetta?" Marcus leaned back, unflappable. "I was protecting our interests, Julian. She was a distraction, a potential liability. Her continued presence, your fixation, was unprofessional." Julian stepped forward, his eyes blazing. Unprofessional? You call it unprofessional? You call destroying a young woman's livelihood because she wouldn't sell a memory, protecting interests? You are a petty, heartless man, Marcus. Stay away from her. Do you hear me? Stay away from Elara Vance. The stack of envelopes on Elara's worn kitchen table grew taller, each one a fresh assault. The latest, an eviction notice, felt less like a formal document and more like Marcus Thorne's cold, unfeeling fist squeezing the last breath from her life. La Fleur had been a dream, a brief, beautiful illusion, now replaced by the grim reality of her secondary job cutting her hours. The diner manager, usually jovial, now avoided her gaze, his apologies thin and practiced. Elara sat, head in hands, the small apartment feeling less like a refuge and more like a cage, shrinking around her and Clara. The weight of it all was crushing. A suffocating blanket of debt and despair. Yet as she looked at the star bread cooling on the counter, the intricate pattern a silent testament to generations, a spark of defiance ignited within her. She had nothing left to lose, it seemed, but this. And this, she knew, was priceless. A quiet afternoon settled over the apartment. The only sound the soft ticking of an old clock. Elara was helping Clara with her lunch, spoon-feeding her a simple broth, when a flicker of something extraordinary crossed her grandmother's eyes. Clara's frail fingers, usually fumbling, found the star bread resting on a small plate beside her. Her touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if she were cradling a precious memory. Her gaze, momentarily clear and sharp, fixed on Elara. "My mother," Clara whispered, her voice surprisingly strong, though laced with the fragility of age. "She made this for Sylvie, before they sent her away, to guide her home." Elara froze, the spoon clattering against the bowl. Sylvie. The name, coupled with the bread, struck her with the force of an unexpected revelation. A deeper, more painful history than she could have imagined was woven into the very fabric of the bread, a story of loss and a desperate hope for a way back. The revelation hung in the air, a phantom limb of a memory Clara could barely grasp. Elara, however, felt a sudden, desperate clarity. A whisper from her own mother, long buried under the weight of daily struggle, surfaced from the depths of her mind. Her mother had spoken of Grandma Clara, not as Elara Vance, but as a child who had received a small, engraved silver locket from her real mother, a woman she never knew. The locket had been Clara's most cherished possession, kept hidden, spoken of in hushed tones. Now the pieces clicked into place with a terrifying precision. The bread, the starburst pattern, the fragmented memories of Sylvie, and a hidden locket. It had to be connected. This was no longer just about a recipe. It was about an identity, a family, and a desperate need for answers that resonated deep within Elara's own soul. She began to search, rummaging through Clara's old boxes, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and burgeoning hope. Hours later, the small apartment was a scene of controlled chaos. Old photographs, yellowed letters, and forgotten trinkets scattered across the floor. Elara, her hands dusted with the remnants of the past, was about to give up when her fingers brushed against something cool and metallic at the bottom of Clara's old sewing box. It was small, tarnished with age, but unmistakably a locket. Her breath caught in her throat as she wiped away the dust. There, etched into the silver, was a delicate starburst pattern, identical to the one she pressed into her grandmother's bread. A triumphant gasp escaped her lips, a small victory in a life filled with defeats. She tried to open it, her eager fingers fumbling, but the clasp was stubborn, fused shut by decades of time, hinting at a secret still locked away, waiting to be rediscovered. Miles away, in the stark opulence of his office, Julian Moreau reviewed Mr. Davies's expanded report. The private investigator's voice, usually dry and clinical, held a hint of professional awe. "We've had a breakthrough, Mr. Moreau. Elara Vance was indeed adopted. Her original birth certificate, unsealed with considerable effort, lists her birth name as Sylvie Dubois." The name, Sylvie Dubois, echoed in Julian's mind, a whisper across 7 decades. It was his sister's name. His hand gripped the polished desk, knuckles white. Davies continued, confirming the adoption took place during the chaotic wartime evacuation period Julian had described, a child lost in the upheaval of history. Julian felt a surge of hope so profound, it threatened to overwhelm his carefully constructed composure. "Spare no expense, Mr. Davies," Julian commanded, his voice low and resolute. "Find the birth parents, find every last detail. This isn't just an investigation anymore. This is family." He stared at the faded adoption papers, Elara's face, unknowingly, superimposing itself over the official script. She wasn't just a porter. She was the living, breathing link to his lost past. For days, the opulent silence of Julian Moreau's penthouse was broken only by the click of his keyboard and the rustle of old documents. He sat hunched over his immense desk, the panoramic city lights a blur beyond his windows, his chef's whites replaced by a rumpled cashmere sweater. He was no longer the Michelin-starred perfectionist, but a man possessed, sifting through digital archives of wartime evacuations, scrolling through endless lists of names, dates, and fragmented reports. Each entry, a stark, clinical echo of human chaos and desperation. He found stories of children lost, families torn apart, entire villages scattered to the winds. The cold, official language of the records couldn't mask the searing pain beneath. With every chaotic detail, his empathy for his lost sister Sylvie deepened. He imagined her, a frightened child clutching a small, crude drawing, just like the one he still carried. The memory of the star bread, a symbol of warmth and home, propelled him forward, a visceral connection to a past he had tried for decades to bury. This wasn't just research, it was a pilgrimage. It was past 3 a.m, the city asleep, when a faint headline caught Julian's tired eye. A local online archive, specifically detailing the evacuation of a small, forgotten French village in 1944. His breath hitched. Asterisk Moreau family among displaced, child Sylvie unaccounted for. The words, faded with time, screamed at him from the screen. A tremor ran through his hand, causing the mouse to clatter. Sylvie. Not just a name from his past, but a tangible, documented absence. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Elara Vance, Elara's grandmother, whose birth name was Sylvie Dubois, was his sister. The adoption, the name change, it all fit the tragic patterns of that chaotic era. A single tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path down his cheek. This wasn't coincidence. It was destiny. A 70-year-old wound finally on the precipice of healing. The urgency to find her, to reclaim her, became an unbearable weight and an exhilarating promise. Julian rose, his movements purposeful. He walked to his private study, a room rarely used, and approached a section of the wall disguised as a bookshelf. Behind a false panel, a small, worn safe was revealed. He entered the combination, codes long memorized, and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was more than just family history. It was the very essence of it. His grandmother's original recipe for the star bread, handwritten on brittle parchment, its edges soft with age. And beside it, a small, tarnished silver pendant. Its design was unmistakably a starburst, identical to the pattern Elara had imprinted on her bread, mirroring the image of the locket Elara's grandmother possessed. He ran his thumb over the cool metal, the tiny, almost imperceptible sapphire at its center catching the dim light. This was it. The matching piece. The undeniable proof. The locket Elara's grandmother wore, the one that had so profoundly stirred him, was indeed the other half of this long-lost legacy. The next afternoon, Marcus Thorne stormed into Julian's office, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "This has gone far enough, Julian," Marcus clipped, slamming a stack of documents onto the polished desk. "The board is convening. They're tired of your distraction. Your obsession with this kitchen porter is jeopardizing everything we've built." He leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. "You abandon this sentimental folly, or you face a vote to remove you from operational control of Nafleur. This family history, these bread recipes, they are irrelevant. Business is about profit, not pathetic childhood fantasies." Julian met his gaze, his jaw set. The old Julian might have wavered, but the man who had just touched the ghost of his past was different. "You see numbers, Marcus," Julian said, his voice surprisingly calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I see family, and I will not abandon her. Not again. This isn't just about my restaurant anymore. It's about my sister, my family. You want a fight? You'll get one." The restaurant's glowing sign, visible through the window, seemed to hum with the tension between them. Later that evening, the city lights again twinkling like scattered diamonds, Julian paced his penthouse. The confrontation with Marcus had solidified his resolve. There was no turning back. He picked up his phone, dialing Davies. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice firm, "I need you to arrange a meeting. Discreetly, with Elara Vance and her grandmother. Tomorrow. Find a neutral location, or if they prefer, their home. And ensure Marcus Thorne knows nothing of this." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I will be bringing certain evidence." He looked at the old recipe card, the tarnished pendant, and the newspaper clippings spread on his table. A lifetime of guarded emotions was about to be laid bare. A tremor of trepidation ran through him, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of immense, impossible hope. This meeting would change everything. Elara's small apartment, usually a haven of quiet resilience, felt heavy and suffocating that dreary afternoon. The weight of Marcus Thorne's threats, the eviction notice, the dwindling hours at her second job, it all pressed down on her, leaving her breathless. She sat beside Grandma Clara, whose eyes were distant, humming a tuneless melody, oblivious to the storm raging around them. Elara clutched the tarnished silver locket, the starburst pattern cool against her thumb. Her mother's fragmented words echoed. Asterisk. A little notch on the third ray, from the top. She had dismissed it as a child's fantasy, but now, with Clara's cryptic murmurs of Sylvie and guide home, a desperate hope flickered. Her fingers, usually so sure kneading dough, trembled as she examined the delicate engraving, and there it was, almost imperceptible, a tiny indentation on one of the star's rays. Heart-pounding, she pressed down hard with her fingernail. A faint, almost inaudible trucked knock echoed in the silent room. The locket, stubbornly sealed for decades, sprang open. Elara gasped. Tucked within its two halves were two tiny, perfectly preserved secrets. On one side, protected by a sliver of glass, was a minuscule, faded photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, her hair swept back, a radiant smile on her face, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, strikingly, undeniably, like Julian Moreau's. On the other side, engraved in a delicate swirling script, were 4 words that stole Elara's breath. Asterisk for Sylvie. Find me. The world tilted on its axis, colors bleeding into a dizzying smear. Elara's mind raced, a torrent of fragmented memories and whispered names crashing together. 20 line. Clara's whispers about Sylvie's starbread, about leaving home, about her real mother, and the eyes in the photograph, Julian's eyes. It was impossible. Her grandmother, Elara Vance, was born Clara Dubois, adopted during the war. Her mother had mentioned it once, a hushed, painful detail. Mushed Sylvie Dubois. The name Julian had whispered. The name Davies had found in Clara's adoption records. It all clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Her grandmother, the frail woman humming beside her, was Julian Moreau's lost sister, Sylvie. And that meant... Elara looked at the locket, then at Clara's peaceful, aging face, then back at the photograph of the young woman who was unmistakably Julian's own sister, his asterisk grandmother. The Michelin-starred chef, the man who had cried over her humble bread, was her great-uncle. The bread, the locket, the whispers, they were all pieces of a 70-year-old story, a story of love and loss and an impossible connection that had just impossibly reappeared. Just as this earth-shattering truth settled in her bones, a soft, hesitant knock sounded at the apartment door. Elara flinched, her first instinct a jolt of pure fear. Marcus. Had he sent more men? Was this the final squeeze? But then, a different thought, a fragile hope, pierced through the dread. This knock wasn't the sharp, authoritative demand of Marcus's associates. It was gentle, almost tentative. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, hopeful rhythm. She moved towards the door, the locket still open in her trembling hand, its secrets laid bare. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she turned the knob and pulled the door open cautiously. Standing in the drab hallway, a stark contrast to the opulence of his usual world, was Julian Moreau. He was dressed simply, not in his chef's whites or a tailored suit, but in a plain cashmere sweater and slacks. His face was pale, etched with nervous vulnerability, his stormy eyes filled with an immense, fragile hope that mirrored her own. He was alone. "Elara," Julian said, his voice soft, a whisper of anticipation. "May I please come in?" Elara, speechless, could only nod, stepping back to let him into her small, cluttered home. The long-awaited moment had arrived. Julian stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the worn furniture, the stack of medical bills on the counter, the sheer, grinding reality of their poverty. His eyes, usually so sharp and discerning, were clouded with a profound sadness. He paused, his breath catching in his throat, as his gaze finally landed on Clara. She sat by the window, a worn blanket draped over her knees, her eyes distant, lost in her own world. But in that instant, to Julian, she wasn't just an ailing old woman. She was Sylvie. His Sylvie. The little sister he'd held hands with as they fled, the girl who'd baked star bread with their grandmother. A sound escaped his lips, a choked, agonizing whisper. "Sylvie," he breathed, the name, a prayer, a plea that had been echoing in his heart for 70 years. Clara, as if summoned by a forgotten melody, slowly turned her head. Her clouded eyes, for a fleeting, impossible moment, cleared. A flicker of recognition, faint but undeniable, passed across her face as she looked at the man who was her brother. Elara, tears streaming down her face, could only choke out, "Grandma Clara, she's Sylvie." Elara, emboldened by the raw, undeniable truth unfolding before them, stepped forward and held out the open locket. She showed Julian the tiny, faded photograph of the young woman with his eyes and the 4 engraved words, "For Sylvie, find me." Julian, tears streaming freely down his face, reached into his own pocket. His hand, usually so precise, trembled as he pulled out a small, worn wooden box. From it, he retrieved his grandmother's original, handwritten star bread recipe card and a small, tarnished silver pendant, an exact match to the starburst design on Elara's locket. He held them out, his own proof, his own piece of the past. The 2 pendants, separated by 7 decades, lay side by side, their starburst patterns aligning perfectly. The faded recipe, the poignant inscription, the matching heirlooms, they spoke a language beyond words, a language of enduring love and unbreakable family bonds. The 3 of them, Julian, Elara, and Clara, stood in the quiet, humble apartment, the past and present finally converging. The long-lost pieces of their family, held by different generations, had finally united, confirming their shared history, their shared pain, and their shared, impossible joy. The quiet, sacred space of the small apartment, still thick with the weight of 70 years, was brutally shattered. A loud, authoritative rap hammered at the door, less an invitation and more a demand. Before Elara or Julian could even react, the door was pushed open with enough force to make it bang against the wall, rattling the cheap plaster. Marcus Thorne stood on the threshold, his impeccably tailored dark suit, a stark, menacing contrast to the humble surroundings. He was flanked by 2 broad-shouldered men in similar attire, their presence instantly sucking the warmth from the room, their eyes cold, efficient, and devoid of empathy. Marcus's gaze swept across the scene. Julian, still kneeling by Clara's chair, his face streaked with tears, a faded recipe card clutched in his hand. Elara, holding the open locket like a shield, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and burgeoning defiance. And Clara, frail and distant, a ghost of a life lived in hardship. A sneer twisted Marcus's lips. "I knew it," he spat, the words slicing through the air like a poisoned knife. "I knew you were a predator, Miss Vance. This is a masterful performance, I'll give you that." You find a lonely old man, discover some obscure detail of his past, and then you weave this elaborate, pathetic fantasy. He strode forward, his expensive leather shoes scuffing on the worn linoleum. "The game is over. I'll ask you one last time for the recipe, and your silence, or things will become far more difficult than you can possibly imagine." Julian rose slowly to his feet, a stillness settling over him, an almost palpable shift in his very being. He was no longer the emotionally guarded chef, nor the weeping man from moments ago. He stood between Marcus and Elara, his posture regal, his eyes blazing with a protective fire Marcus had never witnessed. "They will do no such thing, Marcus." Julian's voice boomed, startling them all with its depth and authority. "This is not a game. And this," he said, gesturing to Elara, "is not a predator. This is Elara Vance, my grandniece. And this woman," his voice softened with a profound tenderness as he pointed to Clara, "is my sister, Sylvie." Marcus let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, a sound devoid of humor. "Sister? Grandniece? Julian, listen to yourself! You are unwell!" This grifter has poisoned your mind. You have never, in my entire life, mentioned a lost sister. Because I was made to feel ashamed." Julian's voice resonated through the small apartment, a raw, powerful confession. "Because my parents, your predecessors, decided that the family name and reputation were more important than a baby girl's life. They cared more for appearances and their social standing than for their own child's heart. I was a scared boy, watching my family torn apart, and they told me to forget, to move on, to bury the shame. And for 70 years, I have lived with that ghost." Julian took a step closer to Marcus, his gaze unwavering. "You are just like them. You see a problem, and you throw money or threats at it. You cannot fathom that something's value could be anything other than monetary. You look at Elara and you see a kitchen porter. I look at her and I see a young woman with more integrity and love in her heart than you have ever shown. I offered her a fortune, Marcus, a life-changing sum of money that could have solved every one of her problems. And she refused. She refused because this bread, our grandmother's recipe, the one meant to guide Sylvie home, meant more to her than all the money in the world." Julian's gaze was relentless, piercing. "You tried to destroy her. You had her fired. You threatened her housing. You used the full weight of the Moreau name to crush a girl who had nothing. And still she protected her grandmother's only keepsake. She protected my sister's legacy without even knowing what it was." Silence descended thick and heavy, broken only by Clara's soft, even breathing. Marcus stared, his face a mask of stunned disbelief, the absolute conviction in Julian's voice shaking the very foundations of his reality. Elara, emboldened by Julian's fierce defense, held up her hand, the locket open in her palm. The light from the dreary afternoon window caught the tiny faded photograph of a young woman with Julian's eyes and the delicate swirling inscription, "For Sylvie, find me." Julian, reaching into his pocket, pulled out his own matching silver pendant, its starburst design identical, then unfolded the yellowed recipe card for the star bread. Finally, he produced the faded newspaper clipping from his archive dive, clearly showing the Moreau family and the mention of a missing child, Sylvie. He laid them on the worn kitchen table, a silent, irrefutable display of history. Marcus's eyes were drawn to them, to the undeniable proof. He saw the face of Julian's mother. Before she was Julian's mother, a girl full of a light he had never known. He saw the inscription, the matching pendants, the wartime report. His carefully ordered world, a world of spreadsheets and market values, of clear wins and losses, fractured. The cold logic that had been his armor for so long shattered against the irrefutable truth of this emotional, messy human story. His face drained of color, leaving him ghastly pale. He was speechless, utterly defeated. Marcus Thorne, the ruthless pragmatist, could not deny the overwhelming evidence of such profound, messy human truth. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by a deep, burning shame. He couldn't bear to look at Julian's disappointed face, or at the quiet dignity of the girl he had tried to break. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked stiffly out of the apartment. He brushed past his confused associates, leaving them standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Go," Julian commanded them, his voice quiet but firm. They glanced at each other, then retreated, closing the door softly behind them. sealing the newly reunited family within the quiet walls of the apartment. The storm had passed. In the ensuing silence, Elara finally let out a shuddering breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Julian came to her, taking the locket and Elara's hand in his own. "He will come around," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or he won't. It doesn't matter. What matters is us now." With a newfound purpose, Julian pulled out his phone. He made a call, his voice a calm, commanding force that Elara now understood could move mountains. "This is Julian Moreau. I need Dr. Alistair Finch. I don't care what his schedule is. My private jet is on the tarmac at SFO. I want him in this city by morning, ready to see a patient." "Yes, cost is no object. Make it happen." He hung up and turned to Elara, his eyes soft with a century of unshed tears. "Your grandmother will have the best care. You will have a home, a real home. You will never have to work 2 jobs again, unless you choose to. You can go to school, travel, anything. The world is yours now, Elara." A week had passed, and the small apartment Julian had quickly secured for Elara and Clara felt less like a temporary dwelling and more like a fledgling home. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of Julian's penthouse. At a simple wooden table, the 3 of them sat, sharing a meal. In the center, a fresh, golden-brown loaf of star bread emitted a comforting aroma. Clara, now Sylvie to Julian, had enjoyed several better days. She ate with a gentle appetite, occasionally reaching out to touch Julian's hand, with a soft, knowing smile that melted decades of ice from his heart. Julian, too, felt a warmth spread through him, a profound sense of peace he hadn't experienced since childhood. This humble meal, shared with his rediscovered family, was a banquet for his soul, far richer than any Michelin-starred dish he had ever created. Back in the gleaming kitchen of Loaf, a different kind of alchemy was taking place. Julian, with an uncharacteristic lightness in his step, had officially offered Elara the position of head baker. She had accepted, her quiet dignity now imbued with a newfound confidence. Dressed in a crisp chef's jacket, her hands, once calloused from cleaning, now skillfully worked dough. Julian watched, no longer the imperious chef, but a student. He learned from Elara's intuitive touch, her innate understanding of the bread's living spirit, while she, in turn, absorbed his precision and mastery of technique. The star bread, a symbol of their incredible reunion, now held a place of honor on Loaf's menu, a silent testament to a love that had defied time. It was a legacy reborn, not just a recipe, but a story baked into every fragrant crumb. Julian stood in his penthouse, the city lights a glittering tapestry below. Once, this panoramic view had represented the pinnacle of his achievement, a testament to a life meticulously built on ambition and control. But now, it felt vast and empty. His vast empire, the Michelin stars, the billions, they were hollow without the warmth of connection. He looked at a newly framed photograph on his desk, a sepia-toned image of young Sylvie, and a vibrant, recent picture of Elara, her smile mirroring his sister's youthful light. True wealth, he now understood, was not measured in accolades or assets. It was measured in the fragile, precious threads of family, in the love that bound them, in the peace that finally settled in his once haunted heart. He was not just Julian Moreau, the chef. He was Julian, brother, great-uncle, and finally, whole. At Loaf, the star bread became more than just a culinary delight. It was an institution, a beloved staple that whispered stories of resilience and reunion. Julian and Elara, now a seamless culinary duo, often shared a knowing glance across the bustling kitchen, a silent acknowledgement of the bread's true, immeasurable value. Its fragrant presence on every table was a constant reminder that some treasures were not found in vaults, but in the heart. Among the staff, the tale of the humble kitchen porter, the stoic chef, and the bread that brought a family back together became a cherished legend, passed from one generation of cooks to the next, a testament to the extraordinary stories hidden within ordinary lives. Julian Moreau's journey, from a life of gilded loneliness to one filled with the priceless inheritance of the heart, reminds us that love and connection, like a cherished family recipe, can bridge decades, heal old wounds, and redefine what it means to be truly wealthy. It is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of kindness, proving that our greatest legacy lies not in what we acquire, but in the love we choose to remember and embrace. If this incredible story of loss and reunion touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Elara's position? Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates a story about the enduring power of family. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will move you, inspire you, and remind you of the extraordinary stories hidden within ordinary lives.